Everybody to this Friday's lunchtime lecture. Today we have a newly minted graduate from the University of Pretoria, Cilliers Marais, who's done a very interesting honors project on the Katkloof Anticline. Is it a diapiric floor fold or strike slip drag fold? So those of you into structural geology ought to get a real kick out of this presentation, I would think. His talk will focus on the entire process from sourcing data, identifying targets, and including drawing up a COVID-tight SOP to camping in the bush. So this should be quite interesting. Cilliers is currently working for an environmental consultancy in Pretoria, Eco Elementary, and he's involved in the mining tech side of things. Cilliers, you want to share your screen and take it away?
Yeah, let's do that. Great. Can everyone see my screen?
That looks great. Thanks. At the end of the talk, there'll be a chance for question and answers. So take it away.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Craig and Eileen, for the opportunity to share my honors project with you. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Natalie Brunt, and she said she'll organize some exposure with the GSSA for me. And I must admit that she succeeded because I feel super exposed at the moment. Yeah, so bear with me. I'm obviously young and new to the game. But yeah, I'm really honored to be here with you guys and share my findings with you. So, what you see in the background there is the majestic Katkloof structure. It's in South Central Limpopo, South Africa. And it's quite an interesting structure. We'll get into that just now. But first off, let me just show you the outline of my presentation. I'm not sure what you can and can't see. I'm just going to assume that you can only see what I'm presenting. Anyway, so first off, we're going to look at why I chose the Katkloof structure in particular. Then we're going to look at some of the preparation I had to do in order to get into the field last year. It was quite interesting. Then we'll take a look at a quick look at the geology and what the literature has to say about the area, and then we'll jump into my data collection results and interpretation. So this is the Mohlapitsi. Just put this thing on. The Mohlapitsi thrust and fold belt in Limpopo. You can see it's defined by this triangular area. It's roughly 60 kilometers in length, and it covers an area of around 800 square kilometers. So it's quite large. Initially, when I looked at it, this is what I saw, this spatial view, because I was locked inside of my house, as I'm sure all of you were last year. So after a while of looking at this structure from space, it sort of became small in my mind. And boy, was I surprised when I got there eventually. It was quite a bit larger than what I expected. So anyway, why did I choose the Katkloof structure? At the start of last year, we did a mapping camp in the Nylstroom area, or Modimolle area in South Africa. We were looking at an area here where the Waterberg Group and the Rooiberg Group meet. And we were specifically interested in finding out the field relations between Waterberg, which is quite a lot younger than the Rooiberg Group, and the Rooiberg Group. And we found some northward verging thrusting in the Waterberg Group, which got us to thinking, what takes place further along the TML? Is there northward verging thrusting all along the TML? Was it localized there? What's going on? So that's a bit of the background. We were over there looking at these rocks, and we figured that maybe the Nylstroom sub-basin of the Waterberg Group might not be Waterberg at all because it was so interfingered with Rooiberg rocks. But anyway, that's someone else's project in the end. So me and my colleagues, Chloe and Max, we went up to around there where it says TML, to the Mohlapiti fold and thrust belt. We decided we want to check out what the rocks look like over there. So once we got that down, it was time to prepare. And unfortunately, COVID-19 happened, lockdown happened, and we were bound inside of our houses. So we couldn't go out. We couldn't even go to the university's library to take out old manuscripts on the Mohlapiti. So then I started looking at this entire thing from space. And to do that, I had to get some proper quality data. So at first I looked via Google Maps, but then I needed high resolution stuff. So I took it upon myself to contact the SANSA, the South African National Space Agency, and ask them for high resolution data. Luckily, my supervisor, Prof. Bambi, was very accommodating. He let me pretty much do what I wanted to, and he just signed off on it. So that was really cool. It gave me the opportunity to make connections outside of university. I spoke to guys at SANSA. I spoke to guys at the national government to get some high-level digital elevation models. I spoke to guys also at the national government to get the topographic maps of our mapping area. And I also spoke to some people in the Netherlands who sources high resolution data, Planet Explorer, and I managed to wiggle my way into an education and research program that basically gives away high resolution satellite imagery for free to students and educators. So yeah, I really enjoyed reaching out to all of these different people and getting to know them, and also just showcasing to my supervisor my communicative prowess, which I think stood me in great stead during last year. So after I got all of this data together, this is what it looked like in the end, and it's fairly decent resolution. It's a 3 by 3 meter pixels, so you can zoom in quite a bit and still get high quality data. And from here, you can see that things look quite mashed up in this area. And now I had to start identifying along this TML, the Tabazimbi Murchison lineament, what am I going to look at? So at first, I saw those mountains. That's the Vonderkorp Group. We'll get into that in a minute or two. And it looked pretty much linear to me, so I wasn't too interested in that. It's hardly deformed from what I could see out of space anyway. Then next up is the Cheeseburg Group. And that looks a bit more mashed up. It looks like almost like an elephant skin, which is quite cool if you think about dolomites and how they weather on a hand specimen scale. It's pretty cool to see what it looks like from space and to be able to see that it's similar. I was quite interested in that. Did some image classification, trying to sort out where I could see banded iron formation outcrop from space. But in the end, Max, my one colleague, he took over that project. So that's not going to be discussed in this particular presentation. And then I got to the Pretoria Group, which is also quite interesting. It's not so linear. It's linear in areas. Over here to the west, you can see it's fairly linear. And in the central parts of the fold belt, it's also fairly linear. But then there are these two areas that are definitely not linear. So that piqued my interest. I thought, okay, let's go and have a look at these rocks. and see if we can find anything interesting about the deformational history. Yeah, so that's in my mind kind of where I wanted to go. And now I had to set a plan in motion, because to get there during COVID-19 was obviously going to be impossible. But then slowly and surely restrictions got lifted, and we were told that we might be able to travel towards the end of August. So I pounced at the opportunity. I immediately contacted our HOD, which was also my supervisor, Prof. Bambi, asked him if we'd be able to go. He told me the chances are fairly slim, but if we play our cards right, then we might be able to do it. So then I got in contact with our dean, Prof. Barend Erasmus. I asked him what to do, and he told me in order to get into the field, I'll need to prepare a proper SOP, a proper plan of action, and I'll have to account for all of the COVID regulations that have been kind of enforced on us by government. So what I did is I went onto the national healthcare system and I looked at files and forms that they force, or well, not that they force, but the forms that they ask healthcare professionals to fill out every day before they go to work. So I took a note from their book, prepared a form that was of similar standard. It had to have emergency contact details, the closest hospital to where we were going to be in the field. Obviously, that entire list of all the different symptoms that might indicate that you have COVID, all of that had to be on there. We had to get temperature meters, the whole works. So we prepared that, and then we also had to prepare a proper itinerary of where we were going to stay, when we were going to stay there, who was going to meet us in the field, who's going to show us around, who are we going to be in contact with. So we had to plan it properly, and I must say I quite enjoyed that part of the process as well. Got into contact with a local, well, not a local geologist, but with a geologist that lives in the Porties area. James Winch is his name. I'm sure you're familiar with him, a couple of you. He was kind enough to show me and my colleagues around one day, the Saturday when we drove up to our study area. He took us really part of so this is up. It is a fantastic view from up there, and James took us there. This is the Vonderkorp Group that you can see in the forefront here, all the way to the back. That's still Vonderkorp, and you know, just to get into a brief geological discussion on the Vonderkorp, it unconformably overlies the basement rocks to the north. It's crystalline basement, and according to what I read, it was deposited in an extensional half-graben setting. It's riddled with growth faults. I'm not going to prove that to you, but if you're interested, you can go and check out Potgieter's thesis. He goes into detail about that. And so that's the Vonderkorp. On top of that is the Cheeseburg Group. Conformably overlies the Vonderkorp. It's mostly chemical sediments, dolomites, banded formation, and it is well folded in the study area. I didn't put in pictures of that, unfortunately, apart from this fold that you can see, and that's an interesting anticline up there. I didn't put in more pictures, but there is crazy folding in there. You wouldn't believe it. So it's quite complex trying to figure out what's going on there, only from the folding. Down there, you can see one of my colleagues, Chloe, taking notes. Anyway, moving on. We got to the Pretoria Group. It unconformably overlies Cheeseburg. It's mostly sandstone, clastic sediments. and it was deposited under various paleo environments. Throughout the study area, I found a lot of recrystallized quartzites, sorry about that, which can obviously be ascribed to the intrusion of the Rustenburg Glade suite of the Bushveld complex that happened in close proximity to the Pretoria Group. In fact, it influenced a lot of the structures that we'll be discussing later on. So that's a basic geological background. Looking specifically at the Katkloof structure, what does the literature say? What happened there? So we've got the early workers like Hall and Truter. They suggest that both the east-northeast trending folds, which are spread throughout the Cheeseburg Group, as well as the north-south trending folds in the Pretoria Group, the Katkloof Fault and the Schwerin Fault, they describe all of that folding to the Bushveld complex intruding. Later workers like Dreyer and Mianu agree that the Pretoria Group deformed before the Cheeseburg Group, so they rate that those weird folds, which we'll be discussing, Katkloof and Schwerin, they rate that took place before the folding of the Cheeseburg, which is quite interesting. Anyway, moving on, I narrowed it down to two main ideas, which is also a bit more recent than those people working in the early 1900s. So Potgieter, he suggests that the Katkloof Fault formed due to left lateral strike slip movements along the Vonderkorp Fault, which is over there. This is a picture from his structural map, which was also quite a mission to get my hands on during COVID, but luckily I got there eventually. So over here you can see there's plenty of anticlines and synclines in there in the Cheeseburg Group. Hinge lines dipping both towards the west and towards the east. And down here, this is his Katkloof anticline, the hinge line dipping towards the south pretty much. So yeah, if you recall, those early workers say that this fold formed before all of these folds. Potgieter, on the other hand, suggests the opposite. He rates that these folds formed before this fold. Eucken also agrees with that. Both of them are in agreement that Cheeseburg got deformed, got severely deformed. In fact, it was thrust up towards the north. You've got overturned folds in there. And then at a later stage, the Katkloof Fault took place. So Eucken rates that Katkloof is a diaper structure or diapiric structure, which detached from the floor as the Bushveld intruded into the Pretoria Group rocks. So the entire, his entire thing is based on the relative densities. Obviously, the magmas of the Rustenburg Glade suite being laden with PGMs, it's quite a bit more dense than the underlying sandstone. And as the sandstone gets heated up, it starts drifting towards the top of this magmatic chamber. And that is what Eucken rates happened here at the Katkloof Fault. So he suggests that it was a symmetric fold to begin with. This is from his thesis. And over here is the erosional surface. And down there is the Katkloof Fault. So he writes that all of this detached and it started drifting up towards the side while the Rustenburg Glade was still intruding. Going back to James and our little expedition, I just want to tell you a bit about our field work, our first experience up there. This is the Marsfontein diamond pit. It is completely unrelated to my study area. or to this presentation actually, but it's quite cool. He told us the story about Marsfontein, so that they paid off their capital investment in 4 days after opening the mine. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool that he took us up there and showed it to us. It's iconic. I think that's probably the fastest time that any mine has paid off its capital investment in the world. I don't know. That's just a guess. But yeah, I thought I'd share that with you. And if you see James, you can tell him that I thought it was pretty cool. In the field, we had a couple of bonnet meetings. This one was late at night, trying to figure out the geological map, trying to get our bearings. Keep in mind, it's in the middle of nowhere. We're 3 students with a couple of maps and a Land Rover, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, we had good times. And this is one of our campsites. You can see down there, that's where we camped. To get to that specific location was quite a story. We were driving through a small village and we were checking it out on Google Maps, and we saw, yeah, it looks like there's a path going up to this place. This is in the Cilliers Fault, by the way. We saw this small path going up there, and we decided we're going to follow it because we want to get to the Cilliers Fault. It's one of the areas that I identified from space, and we need to see what's going on there. So we drive and we drive and drive, and we can see there's a set of tire tracks in the dirt. So we know someone's been here before us, and that gave us heart because the path got narrower and narrower, and the Landy got scratched, and I could see Max getting more upset. He was driving, it says Landy, but he pushed through in the end, and we got to this idyllic spot out in the middle of nowhere. Set up camp, and I don't know, probably an hour later, off in the distance, we hear bells jingling, and slowly but surely it's getting louder and louder until eventually up this dry riverbed comes a small little donkey cart, and we figured out, obviously, that was the tire tracks we've been seeing, because the donkey cart is literally the back of a 1400 Nissan Bakkie, like the Bakkie area, and this oak is standing on top of it with his feet spread out, kind of keeping his balance and keeping the donkeys aligned. I don't know who was more, what's the word, shocked to see the other party there. I saw him, his eyes went wide as saucers, but that was pretty cool, meeting the locals. And I just thought I'd share that little anecdote with you. So yeah, then we got to collecting data. Obviously, because it was a structural project, we didn't pay too much attention to what's the word, to lithologies and rock classification, mineralogy. We were more interested in looking for structures. Yeah, so what we did is we measured some bedding parallel strike dip measurements, and we obviously looked for planar fabric, we looked for slickened sides, we looked for boudinage, that kind of thing. We found some planar fabrics, but it was so messed up and mashed up that it was quite difficult to discern what they were doing. So I didn't include that in my final write-up. It says, yeah, I took 2. I took a whole lot more, but there were only 2 that was usable. So yeah, I left that out. Anyway, I took GPS coordinates at all the locations so that we could plot it on a map properly. And this is what I found at the Katkloof structure. So even though I mentioned I didn't pay too much attention to mineralogy, I obviously had to take a look at the rocks. So there was some quartzitic rocks, or a lot of quartzitic rocks, a lot of micas. There was some metamorphic fabrics, a lot of micas in there as well. Here and there, I found some conglomerates. It was quite elongated, long bedding. And then there were a couple of veins doing weird things, quartz mica veins, some hematite veins. Anyway, yeah, that's what the rock looked like on a small scale. This is what the structural data looked like. So as you can see from the stereo net, I plotted the poles to bedding on both the west and the eastern limb of the Katkloof structure. You can see here the western limb, those poles are all over the show, whereas the eastern limb is quite uniform. So I didn't quite know what to make of that initially, but this is what I found eventually. So looking at the western limb in isolation, taking the average of all of these randomly spaced poles, I got a subvertically dipping, steeply, like, yeah, it was pretty much vertical, dipping towards the southwest limb, and the eastern limb was also steeply dipping, but not that steep, around 60 degrees towards the southeast. And then combining the two, you see a very steeply dipping fold axial plane, and also a steeply dipping or steeply plunging trend line down there. So that is not what you would normally ascribe to just a normal fold structure. If you're looking at something that's been folded horizontally, you wouldn't expect such a steeply dipping hinge line. So that got me thinking, maybe it's something else. It's obviously not a horizontal fold that's been turned over. It has to be something else. So could it be Potgieter's strike slip folding, or is it a diaper that got a bit mashed up? In the end, I decided that it is strike slip drag folding. I'll show you why now. But it could probably also be a diaper that got folded afterwards as that strike slip movement occurred. Let's take a look at that. So I just want to show you, sorry if I'm jumping around and all over the place, I'm a bit jittery. This is my first time presenting to a large crowd. Well, it's not too large, but I mean outside of university. So I beg your forgiveness if I'm confusing you. Anyway, over here, I just related my data to the data in Hugin's thesis, just to kind of show that the planar data that I took on those structures are more or less in line with what other professionals have done before me. This is a normal fluty diagram over here, and these black dots are Hugin's measurements on the Katkloof fold, and that green dot is what I got from mapping the nose of the Katkloof fold. So it's more or less in the same area, which was reassuring to me. It meant that I wasn't completely botching it. I was doing something that other people had done before, and it would be able to be, what's the word? Someone would be able to do it again. So let's get into the interpretation side of things. Over here, we've got the Katkloof fold. I did most of my data collection in this area. You can see there, that's the western fold. You can see that all of those poles that were scattered around the edge of the stereo net, you can see where they come from now. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, down here, we've got the Vonderkorp Fault. You can see there's a lot of displacement over there. It's up to 8 kilometers. And over here, we have a smaller fault, the Stoffberg Fault, which is also left lateral displacement, but not to the extent of the Vonderkorp Fault. So to me, this looks like left lateral strike slip faulting. Let's just take a step back and slip zone. So let's say we're looking at this area from space, And these are the different rock packages that we find there. This red line is our fault line. If we have dextral, the right hand of the fault moves towards you and the left hand moves away from you, this is what the strata will start doing. So you'll get drag folding, something like this will start happening. As you can see on the picture there, I probably don't have to explain with my hands as well. And then after a while, if that carries on, you'll find that the strata break and they start moving. And we see something like this at the Katkloof, along the Vonderkorp Fault in the Cutlass vicinity. You can see down here that dextral relic of that dextral strike slip movement that I just explained to you. But what do we see up top there? That really doesn't look like dextral movement, because if it was dextral, these sets of strata would have been bent like that instead of like this. So what's going on there? Then I thought, okay, maybe that fault got reactivated. We could have a first set of faulting where we had right lateral movement or dextral movement, and then after a while that fault could have been reactivated by new tectonic forces, and it could have moved in the opposite direction, so we could get strike slip movement afterwards. So this is just a brief discussion, or not a discussion, this is just a small little picture of what sinistral strike slip movement would be. It's the exact opposite of dextral movement. I'm sure you know that already. Apologies if my eyes wander. My colleagues around here are all looking at me and making funny faces. That's probably what happens to the newbie. Anyway, so could it be that at first we had dextral movement, and then when it got reactivated along this fault, we got these sinistral overprints? That's possible. That's what I think happened. Down here, we obviously have relics of dextral drag folding, and then up top, these layers got refolded in a sinistral sort of way. And that's what I thought happened over here. And let's just look at it on a map so that you can see my thinking. Oh, sorry. Yeah, over here you've got that sinistral stuff, and down here you've got the relic of the drag folding. So that's the way I interpreted it. This is just a little Google image that I took to show you what I found. And that is more or less it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I made some sense. Please do give me feedback. Be as critical as you want. Yeah, I'd like to improve, obviously, and that's why I'm here. So the floor is open. Please go for it.
Thank you, Cilliers. I'll open the floor to questions and comments. We've got a couple in the chat box.
So my first comment is that when I started listening to you, I wish that I was that articulate when I had just left university.
Good point. I think all of us feel that way. Would it be possible for you to make a PDF copy of your honors project available? I would love to read more about it. Presumably there's an honors thesis that has been produced, so perhaps you could give your email address, Cilliers, and they can get in touch with you and put it into the chat box. Should you want to listen to this talk again, it will be up on the GSSA YouTube channel probably by Monday or Tuesday. So just visit that. Any other comments or questions from anybody? Maybe just one from me. In terms of time span of faulting and folding, what kind of time span is envisaged for these kinds of structures to develop? I know that's probably a complex question and maybe not one that can be easily answered, but have you got any ideas about that?
I don't know. Sorry, I actually didn't touch on that in my research at all. But I guess it takes quite a while. It's not going to happen overnight. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't.
Any other questions or comments? If not, Nolene, do you have anything more to add at this stage?
No, thanks very much. Just thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks for the presentation. It's definitely food for thought for anybody involved in working in that part of the world. Be aware there is structural complexity.
Yeah.
I think Craig's just summed up your entire honours thesis.
Yes. Yeah. Spent a year on it. And here he comes in 2 seconds and he just boom.
I see Brandon's got his hand up there. Brandon, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Now we can, yes.
We can.
Yes.
Sorry, my earphones don't seem to be working and I was trying to type furiously in the chat box. I just wanted to say that a big part of being a geo and going to the field is, you know, what you were touching on in the beginning. And I think it takes a very long time for geologists that have freshly graduated to get to that stage of actually engaging with various stakeholders, checking all of the paperwork and doing that communication. So I just want to say that's a really great soft skill to add to your toolbox. And, you know, the technical stuff will come, but just because you did all of that work, it's not any less important than the technical work. So just wanted to say that's a great skill that you've already got.
Thank you, Brandon. Xavier, to answer your question, no, I'm not really involved in the remote sensing side here. We're more focused on mine planning and operations. So we have a section that deals with the environment, with the remote sensing, as part of our consultancy, but I'm not really part of that team. I'm just working in the field more. I do use Google Earth now and then to just make rough drafts of plans for some of our clients when we do proposals, but nothing high level.
Any more comments or questions or queries? With that, I think I can close the meeting.
Well, I'd like to comment.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I just want to, sorry, Craig, I just want to thank all of my colleagues from last year and from previous years. I see Poppy's here as well. Just want to thank all of you for sitting in. It's good to know you guys have my back.
It's all about networking. So thank you, everybody, for participating.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
With that, I'll close the meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks. Bye-bye.